Welcome to the Running Library. Today we're breaking down the key ideas from The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. Let's get into it. Most startups don't fail because the founders are lazy or the idea is bad. They fail because they spend months or years building something nobody actually wants. That's the core problem Eric Ries tackles in The Lean Startup, a modern business classic that's less about hustle and more about reducing waste, wasted time, wasted money, and wasted effort building the wrong product. If you've ever watched a team obsess over features, branding, and a big launch, only to hear crickets afterward, this book is basically the antidote. So let's break down what the Lean Startup is about, who it's for, who should probably skip it, 6 key takeaways with concrete examples, and a simple 3-step plan you can use right away, whether you're building a company, a product inside a company, or even a new service as a solo creator. At a high level, the Lean Startup is about creating a system for learning what customers actually want. Fast. Ries argues that a startup isn't just a smaller version of a big company. A startup is an organization designed to search for a sustainable business model under conditions of extreme uncertainty. That uncertainty is the key. When you don't know what customers will buy, what features matter, what pricing works, or what channel will even reach people, your job is not to execute a perfect plan. Your job is to learn. And the way you learn is through a loop Ries popularized: build, measure, learn. You build the smallest thing that can test a hypothesis. You measure what happens with real customers, and you learn whether to keep going in that direction or change course. That change course is where the famous pivot comes in. Pivoting isn't randomly switching ideas because you got bored. It's a structured change in strategy informed by what you learned. Now, who is this book for? It's for founders and early startup teams who are still figuring out product market fit, meaning they're still searching for a product people want badly enough to pay for or consistently use. It's for product managers, designers, and engineers who want a practical framework for experiments and iteration. It's also for people inside larger companies who are trying to build new products and feel stuck in slow, approval-heavy processes. It's not for people who already have a stable, mature business model and are just looking for scaling tactics, although you can still borrow parts of it. And it's not for anyone who expects a neat, step-by-step formula that guarantees success. Lean Startup is a mindset and a set of tools, not a magic spell. Also, if your work involves heavy regulation, safety-critical systems, or long validation cycles like medical devices or aerospace, you can still apply the principles, but you'll need to adapt the speed and the type of experiments you run. Now let's get into 6 key takeaways, with examples that make them real. First takeaway: startups are a learning machine, not a feature factory. Ries pushes a shift in how you define progress. In many teams, progress means we shipped a bunch of stuff. In Lean Startup thinking, progress means we validated something important about customers and the business. Example sound: say you're building a meal planning app. The feature factory approach says build recipes, grocery lists, calorie tracking, social sharing, and a slick onboarding flow, then launch. The learning machine approach says what's the riskiest assumption? Maybe it's that busy professionals will actually follow meal plans. So instead of building everything, you test that assumption. You might create a simple landing page offering a weekly meal plan email, charge a small fee, and see if people sign up and stick with it. You're not trying to ship an app, you're trying to learn whether the core value is real. Second takeaway: use the MVP to test hypotheses, not to impress people. MVP stands for minimum viable product, and it's often misunderstood. People hear minimum and think cheap and ugly. People hear viable and think a full product. Ries's point is that an MVP is the smallest version of your product that lets you start the build, measure, learn loop with real customers. Examples A. Imagine you want to start an online marketplace for custom furniture. A full marketplace is complex, vendor profiles, payments, messaging, reviews, logistics. An MVP could be much simpler. You could manually curate a few furniture makers, post photos on a basic site, and when a customer orders, you coordinate everything behind the scenes. To the customer, it looks like a service. To you, it's a test. Do people want this enough to buy? What styles sell? What price points work? What questions do customers ask? You're validating demand before automating the machinery. The MVP isn't about cutting corners forever. It's about avoiding the tragedy of building the perfect system for a problem that doesn't exist. Third takeaway, measure what matters. Actionable metrics over vanity metrics. One of the most useful ideas in the book is the difference between vanity metrics and actionable metrics. Vanity metrics are numbers that look good in a meeting but don't tell you what to do next, like total sign-ups, total page views, or total downloads. Actionable metrics are tied to behavior and decisions, like activation rate, retention, conversion, and cohort-based trends. Example, you launch a language learning product. You get 10,000 sign-ups in a week. Sounds amazing, but if only 300 people complete their first lesson and only 50 come back next week, you don't have traction. You have a leaky bucket. An actionable metric might be percentage of new users who complete lesson 1 within 24 hours, and week 1 retention by sign-up cohort. Those tell you where the product is failing and what to experiment on. Ries also emphasizes the idea of innovation accounting, creating a clear way to measure progress when you don't yet have a mature business. That means defining the right metrics for your stage and using them to decide whether you're improving. Fourth takeaway, run experiments like a scientist. Turn assumptions into tests. Lean Startup is really a framework for disciplined experimentation. You start with assumptions about the customer, the problem, the solution, the channel, the pricing. Then you turn those assumptions into hypotheses you can test. Example, suppose you're building a B2B tool for small law firms. You assume they'll pay $99 a month. That's a hypothesis. Before you build a complex product, you can test willingness to pay with a simple sales conversation, a pricing page, or even pre-orders. If every conversation ends with, "This is great, but we'd only pay $20, that's not a small detail. That's a foundational learning. It changes the entire business model. The big point, you're not just building, you're designing experiments that reduce uncertainty. Fifth takeaway, know when to pivot and when to persevere. The pivot is one of the most famous concepts from the book, and it's also one of the most emotionally difficult. Founders can get attached to their original idea. Teams can feel like pivoting means they failed. Ries reframes pivoting as progress, a sign you learned something true. Example, you're building a habit tracking app for students, but your retention is terrible. You interview users and realize the students don't want another tracker. They want accountability. The feature that gets the most excitement is a weekly check-in with a mentor or small group. A pivot might mean shifting from habit tracking app to accountability community with light tracking. Same mission, different strategy. The trick is to set a cadence for pivot or persevere decisions. If you never ask the question, you can drift for years. If you ask it too often without enough data, you thrash. Sixth takeaway, build an organization that can innovate continuously. The Lean Startup isn't only about early stage chaos, it's also about creating a culture and process that supports rapid learning, small batch work, quick feedback, empowered teams, and systems that prevent success theatre. Example Sugdi. Inside a larger company, a team might be required to write a huge requirements document, get approvals, and deliver a massive release 6 months later. By then, the market changed, the assumptions were wrong, and you find out too late. Lean principles push towards smaller releases, earlier customer exposure, and tighter feedback loops. That could mean shipping a limited beta to a small segment, or running a pilot with a handful of customers before scaling. This is where lean startup overlaps with modern product thinking. The goal is not one perfect launch, it's continuous iteration based on real usage. Now if you're thinking, okay, but how do I apply this without getting lost in theory? Here's a simple 3-step action plan inspired by the book. You can do this in a week and repeat it every week. Step 1. Write down your riskiest assumption and turn it into a testable hypothesis. Not people will like this, be specific. For example, freelance designers will pay $29 a month for a tool that generates client-ready proposals in under 10 minutes. That's a claim you can test. Ask yourself, if this assumption is wrong, does the whole idea collapse? If yes, test it first. Step 2. Build the smallest MVP that can test that hypothesis and decide the success metric in advance. This might be a landing page with a clear offer and a payment button. It might be a concierge service where you do the work manually. It might be a clickable prototype plus a structured user test. The key is that it produces real evidence, not opinions, and set the metric before you run it. For example, out of 100 visitors, at least 5 will attempt to purchase, or out of 10 target customers, at least 3 will agree to a paid pilot. If you don't define success ahead of time, you'll rationalize anything afterward. Step 3. Run the build, measure, learn loop and make a pivot or persevere decision. Collect the data, talk to users and interpret what happened. Then decide, do you persevere and iterate on the same direction or pivot to a new approach based on what you learned? If you persevere, choose one improvement to test next, maybe onboarding, pricing or a narrower customer segment. If you pivot, be explicit about what is changing, the customer, the problem, the solution, the channel or the revenue model. Repeat this loop consistently. The compounding effect of weekly learning is the real superpower. Before we wrap up, a quick reality check. The lean startup can be misused if you treat it as an excuse to ship sloppy products or to avoid long-term vision. Rees isn't saying never plan. He's saying plan in a way that stays honest when reality disagrees. The goal is to combine vision with validated learning. Dream big but test small. So here's the takeaway in one line. The lean startup is a playbook for turning uncertainty into knowledge and knowledge into a business, faster, cheaper, and with far less self-deception. If you're a founder, it helps you stop guessing and start testing. If you're on a product team, it gives you language and structure for experiments that actually matter. And if you've ever built something in isolation only to discover nobody cared, this book gives you a better way to work, one where learning is the real deliverable. That's it for this episode from the Running Library. If you want, tell me what you're building or what you're thinking of building, and I'll help you identify your riskiest assumption and design a simple MVP test for it. If you found this summary helpful, subscribe to the Running Library for new insights every day, and tell me in the comments what book or article you want next.